The summer sun blazed mercilessly over the New Mexico territory in 1872, baking the red earth into dust that swirled in tiny tornadoes across the barren landscape. Tessa Kincaid opened her cracked lips, attempting to cry out, but only a hoarse whisper escaped as she crawled forward another inch, her torn dress catching on the sharp desert scrub. 3 days without water had left her delirious, the distant mountains wavering like ghosts through her blurred vision. The betrayal that had brought her to this desperate state burned more fiercely than the sun overhead. Jackson Tate, the man she had trusted enough to follow west from Boston, had taken everything, her savings, her dignity, and now, it seemed, her life. When she'd confronted him about the missing money, about the whispers of another woman, he and his associates had driven her miles into the desert, laughing as they pushed her from the wagon. "Good luck finding your way back, Miss Kincaid," Jackson had sneered. "A proper Boston lady ought to experience the real West before she dies." Now, as the relentless afternoon heat pressed down on her blistered shoulders, Tessa dragged herself toward a small outcropping of rocks. If she could only reach shade, perhaps she might survive until nightfall. Her gloves, once fine white lace, now torn and stained with dirt and blood, had long since failed to protect her delicate hands. Each breath felt like inhaling fire. Each movement sent waves of agony through her body. But something fierce and stubborn within her refused to surrender. She would not die in this God-forsaken place. Not like this. Miles away, Ethan Thornton guided his dun stallion carefully across the same stretch of desert. The veteran cowboy had spent 15 years ranging across the territories, working cattle drives from Texas to Montana, and had developed an almost preternatural ability to read the land. Something about the disturbed earth before him raised his hackles. "What have we got here, Thunder?" he murmured to his horse, dismounting to examine what appeared to be wagon tracks accompanied by several hoofprints. His eyes narrowed beneath the brim of his weather-beaten hat as he studied the ground. The signs told a story. A wagon had stopped here, several men had dismounted, and then... Ethan frowned. There was something else, something that made his stomach tighten with unease. Boot prints, then smaller prints. A woman's shoes, by the looks of them, heading away from the wagon. Alone, Ethan straightened, scanning the horizon. No one traveled alone in this stretch of desert, especially not a woman in what appeared to be city shoes. The tracks were several days old, but clear enough in the hard, packed earth. The woman had been walking erratically, stumbling. A grim understanding settled in his chest. He'd seen this before someone left to die in the desert. It was a cruel death, slow and agonizing. "Come on, boy," he said, swinging back onto his horse. "Let's see if she's still alive." He followed the meandering trail, noting with growing concern how the footprints eventually gave way to marks that suggested the woman had fallen to her hands and knees. By midday, the tracks showed she'd been crawling. Ethan urged Thunder to a faster pace. If the woman was still alive after what looked like 3 days in this heat, it would be nothing short of miraculous. But Ethan Thornton had long ago learned that miracles occasionally happened in the most God-forsaken places. The sun was dipping toward the western horizon when he spotted a flash of fabric against the red dirt. His heart sank. From this distance, the still form looked lifeless. He dismounted and approached cautiously, kneeling beside the woman's prone body. Her dress, once fine but now shredded and dust-covered, revealed her as an Easterner. Her hair, the color of burnished copper where it wasn't matted with dirt, had come loose from its pins. Her skin was severely sunburned, her lips cracked and bleeding. Gently, Ethan turned her over. To his astonishment, her eyelids fluttered. She was alive, barely, but alive. "Madam," he said softly, reaching for his canteen. "Can you hear me?" Tessa heard the voice as if from across a vast canyon, distant and echoing. Was this death finally coming for her? She fought to open her eyes to focus on the shadowy figure leaning over her. "Water," the man said, and she felt something cool and wet against her lips. She tried to gulp greedily, but firm hands pulled the canteen away. "Easy now. Too much at once will make you sick." The world spun as strong arms lifted her. She caught the scent of leather and wood smoke before darkness claimed her once more. Ethan carried the unconscious woman to his horse, fashioning a makeshift travois from branches and his bedroll. His nearest destination was Cimarron, still a good day's ride away. The woman needed medical attention soon, or all his efforts would be for naught. As night fell, he made camp in the shelter of a rocky overhang, building a small fire. The woman hadn't stirred since he'd found her, but her breathing seemed stronger. He dribbled water between her lips at regular intervals, watching her throat work as she swallowed reflexively. In the firelight, he could see she was young, perhaps 25, with delicate features that spoke of genteel upbringing. What was she doing out here, alone in the New Mexico desert, and who had left her to such a fate? Ethan had encountered all manner of cruelty in his years roaming the frontier, but abandoning a woman to die of thirst ranked among the most despicable acts he could imagine. "You're safe now," he said quietly, though he doubted she could hear him. "I'll get you to Cimarron. There's a doctor there who can help you." Morning brought a momentary improvement. The woman's eyes opened briefly, revealing irises the color of mountain lakes. She stared at Ethan without comprehension before slipping back into unconsciousness. By midday, her condition had worsened. Fever gripped her and she muttered deliriously as Ethan urged Thunder to a faster pace. The horse was tiring, but Ethan knew they couldn't stop. "Just a few more hours, boy," he encouraged his faithful mount. "We can make it." Cimarron appeared on the horizon as evening approached, a small collection of buildings that represented civilization in this harsh landscape. Ethan rode directly to Dr. Harold Bennett's modest house at the edge of town. The doctor, a graying man with kind eyes and a perpetually worried expression, took one look at the woman and ushered Ethan inside. "How long has she been like this?" Bennett asked, already gathering supplies. "Found her in the desert yesterday." "Looks like she'd been out there 3 days, maybe more." Bennett shook his head grimly. "She's severely dehydrated. Sunstroke too, I'd wager. Help me get her to the examination room." For 2 days, Tessa hovered between life and death. The doctor worked tirelessly, while Ethan found himself unable to leave, taking up residence in a chair in the doctor's front room. He told himself it was merely concern for a fellow human being, but something about the woman's vulnerability and courage to have survived so long under such conditions had stirred something in him he thought long buried. On the third morning, Dr. Bennett emerged from the sick room with a cautious smile. "Her fever broke during the night. She's asking for water, a good sign. She's weak as a newborn kitten, but I think she'll pull through." Relief washed through Ethan. "Can I see her?" Bennett hesitated. "She's still quite fragile and she might be frightened. She doesn't remember how she got here." "I'll be gentle," Ethan promised. The doctor nodded reluctantly. 5 minutes, no more. And for heaven's sake, wash up first. You look like you've been dragged behind a stagecoach." Ethan grinned, suddenly aware of his disheveled appearance. He made quick use of the basin of water the doctor provided, scrubbing the worst of the trail dust from his face and hands. He couldn't do much about his worn buckskins or the 3-day growth of beard, but at least he looked marginally more presentable. When he entered the sick room, the woman was propped up on pillows, her copper hair spilling around her shoulders. Her face was still reddened from sun exposure, but her eyes, those remarkable blue eyes, were clear and alert. They widened at the sight of him. "You," she whispered. Ethan removed his hat, suddenly awkward. "Madam, glad to see you're feeling better. You're the one who found me." It wasn't a question. I remember. Water and being carried. "Name's Ethan Thornton, madam. I followed your tracks through the desert." She studied him for a long moment. "Tessa Kincaid," she finally said. "I owe you my life, Mr. Thornton. Just Ethan, please, and you don't owe me anything." Any decent man would have done the same. A shadow crossed her face. "I've learned that decent men are rarer than I once believed." Before Ethan could respond, Dr. Bennett appeared at his elbow. "That's enough for now. Miss Kincaid needs rest." Ethan nodded, backing toward the door. "I'll check on you tomorrow, Miss Kincaid, if that's all right." A small smile touched her lips. "I'd like that, Ethan." Over the next week, as Tessa regained her strength, Ethan visited daily. He brought small gifts, a book from the general store, wildflowers from the prairie outside town, once even a slice of Mrs. Peterson's famous apple pie from the local boarding house. Gradually, Tessa shared her story. How she'd come west as a teacher, meeting Jackson Tate in Santa Fe. How his charm and promises had blinded her to his true nature. How she'd discovered he was using her savings to finance a gambling habit and to court the daughter of a wealthy rancher. "When I confronted him, he and his friends took me for a ride," she said bitterly. "Said they were showing me the sights. Then they stopped the wagon, dragged me down, and left me there. Jackson said I was too much trouble now that I knew the truth." Anger flared in Ethan's chest. "This Jackson Tate, he's still in Santa Fe." Tessa looked up sharply. "Don't, he's not worth it. He tried to murder you, and I survived." She reached out impulsively, touching his hand. "Thanks to you." The contact sent an unexpected jolt through Ethan. He cleared his throat, withdrawing his hand carefully. "What will you do now? Return east?" Tessa's expression hardened. "I have nothing to go back to. My parents died 2 years ago. I sold our Boston home to come west." She shook her head. "No, I won't let Jackson Tate drive me away. I came to teach, and that's what I intend to do." Ethan admired her determination, but practicality made him frown. "Cimarron's a rough town, Miss Kincaid. Not much call for teachers here. Then I'll go elsewhere. I've heard Bozeman in Montana Territory is growing. They might need educators." "Bozeman," Ethan straightened. "That's a long way from here." "I'm aware," Tessa said dryly. "But I understand the Northern Pacific Railroad is building through that region. It would be a fresh start, far from Santa Fe." Ethan rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. "It so happens I'm heading north myself. Got a job offer from a rancher outside Bozeman." This wasn't strictly true. Ethan had been drifting, as he had for years. But the idea of ensuring Tessa's safe passage to Montana suddenly seemed like the most important task in the world. "Are you suggesting we travel together?" Tessa's expression was guarded. "It would be safer." "The journey's arduous, especially for a woman alone." "I can pay my way," she said quickly. "Jackson didn't get all my money. I kept an emergency fund sewn into my petticoat." Ethan smiled. "Smart thinking. I may be Eastern bred, Mr. Thornton, but I'm not a complete fool." "Never thought you were." His smile faded. "But the territories are dangerous. Indian troubles, outlaws, natural hazards. Having a companion improves your odds considerably." Tessa studied him, clearly weighing her options. Trust didn't come easily to her now, not after Jackson's betrayal. But something about Ethan Thornton's steady gaze reassured her. "Very well," she said finally. "When Dr. Bennett declares me fit to travel, we can discuss arrangements." 2 weeks later, they departed Cimarron. The town had taken up a collection for Tessa, providing her with sturdy traveling clothes, basic supplies, and a gentle mare named Daisy. Dr. Bennett had tried to persuade her to stay longer, concerned about her undertaking such a journey so soon after her ordeal, but Tessa was determined. "The longer I wait, the more difficult it will be," she told him. "Besides, I'll have an experienced guide." Bennett had pulled Ethan aside before they left. "Take care of her, Thornton. She's stronger than she looks, but that experience in the desert took more out of her than she admits." Ethan promised to watch over her, a vow he took more seriously than any he'd made in years. The first few days on the trail tested Tessa's resolve. Though she'd insisted she could ride, she hadn't been on horseback since childhood, and the long hours in the saddle left her sore and exhausted. Yet she never complained, dismounting each evening with quiet dignity despite the pain Ethan knew she must be feeling. They developed a routine. Ethan would rise before dawn, rebuilding the fire and preparing coffee before Tessa awoke. They'd eat a simple breakfast, break camp, and ride until midday, stopping for a brief rest. Then they'd continue until dusk, when Ethan would find a suitable campsite, preferably near water. While he tended the horses, Tessa would prepare their evening meal. She was a surprisingly competent cook, even with limited supplies and a campfire. At night, they'd sit by the fire, talking until exhaustion drove them to their separate bedrolls. Ethan found himself looking forward to these evening conversations. Tessa was well-read and thoughtful, with opinions on everything from literature to politics. She challenged him, made him think about things he'd never considered. "Why did you become a cowboy?" she asked one night as they watched the stars appear above the Colorado plains. Ethan poked at the fire, considering his answer. "Never planned on it. My father was a blacksmith in Missouri. I was apprenticed to him, learning the trade. What happened? War came. I enlisted in '62, fought for the Union. When I came home in '65, everything was different. My father had died. The town had changed. I'd changed." He stared into the flames. "Couldn't settle back into that life. Headed west, found work with cattle, been doing it ever since." "Do you ever regret it? Not having a home, I mean." "Home's where you make it out here," he replied. "Some nights, under stars like these, I can't imagine wanting to be anywhere else." Tessa was silent for so long that Ethan thought he might have offended her. Finally, she said softly, "I envy that. The ability to feel at home anywhere. You'll find your place, Tessa. Bozeman's a good town. Growing fast, but still got a sense of community. You'll make a fine teacher there." She smiled, the firelight catching the copper highlights in her hair. "Thank you for saying that." As they traveled northward, crossing into Wyoming territory, Ethan noticed subtle changes in Tessa. The farther they got from New Mexico, the more she seemed to blossom. Her posture in the saddle improved, her complexion regained its natural color, and she laughed more freely. One afternoon, as they rode through a wildflower-dotted meadow, she surprised him by suddenly urging Daisy into a gallop, her hair streaming behind her like a banner. Ethan watched, entranced by her unexpected exuberance, before spurring thunder after her. When he caught up, she was breathless with laughter. "I haven't done that since I was a girl," she confessed. "It felt wonderful." Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes bright with excitement. Ethan felt something shift inside him, a recognition that this journey was changing him as much as it was changing her. "You're full of surprises, Miss Kincaid," he said, trying to mask his reaction with humor. "Tessa," she corrected him. "After all we've been through, I think we're past formalities, don't you?" Their journey wasn't without hazards. A sudden thunderstorm forced them to seek shelter in an abandoned trapper's cabin, where they spent 2 uncomfortable days listening to rain hammer the leaky roof. A rattlesnake spooked Daisy, nearly throwing Tessa, though Ethan managed to shoot the reptile before it could strike. And always, There was the awareness that they were traveling through territories where tensions between settlers and native tribes frequently erupted into violence. Ethan found himself increasingly protective of Tessa, even as he came to respect her resilience. She never flinched from the difficulties of trail life, handling each new challenge with determination and, increasingly, good humor. One evening, as they camped by a tributary of the North Platte River, Ethan returned from checking a trap line to find Tessa standing waist-deep in the water, her hair wet and slicked back, wearing only her chemise. "Oh," she exclaimed, seeing him. "I thought you'd be gone longer." Ethan immediately turned his back, embarrassed. "Forgive me. I didn't mean to intrude." "It's all right," she said, though he could hear the splash of water as she moved deeper. "The water's wonderfully cool. You should try it when I'm finished." Despite his embarrassment, Ethan smiled at her pragmatic attitude. The Tessa who had left Cimarron would have been mortified by such an encounter. This new Tessa took it in stride. "I'll check on the horses," he mumbled, retreating hastily. Later, after they'd both bathed and changed into clean clothes, Tessa brought up the subject as they ate dinner. "I apologize if I made you uncomfortable earlier," she said. "I should have been more careful." "No need to apologize," Ethan replied. "It's natural to want to wash off the trail dust." Tessa studied him thoughtfully. "You're a gentleman, Ethan Thornton, whatever you may think of yourself. Most men I've known would have behaved quite differently in that situation." The compliment warmed him more than it should have. "I was raised to respect women," he said simply. "My mother would haunt me if I did otherwise." Tessa smiled. "Tell me about your mother. You've never mentioned her." Ethan hadn't spoken of his family in years, but something about the quiet night and Tessa's gentle interest loosened his tongue. He told her about his mother, a strong, practical woman who had managed their household with quiet efficiency, while his father ran the smithy. How she taught him to read by lamplight, instilling in him a love for books that had surprised his more practically minded father. How she died of influenza the winter before the war, leaving a hole in his life that had never quite filled. "She would have liked you," he concluded. "She always said education was the key to a better world." "I wish I could have met her," Tessa said softly. "She sounds remarkable." The conversation shifted to Tessa's own parents, her scholarly father, a professor of literature at Harvard, and her mother, who had scandalized Boston society by advocating for women's suffrage. From them, Tessa had inherited both a love of learning and a stubborn independence that had eventually led her west. "They wanted more for me than just a good marriage," she explained. "They believed women should have purpose beyond being wives and mothers." "Is that why you became a teacher?" "Partly. I also simply love watching children discover the world through books." Her expression grew wistful. "I had started a small school in Santa Fe before Jackson. The children were wonderful, a mix of Hispanic, Anglo, and even a few Native American students. I miss them." "You'll have new students in Bozeman," Ethan assured her, "and they'll be lucky to have you." As they journeyed farther north, the landscape changed dramatically. The open plains gave way to the foothills of the Rocky Mountains, with towering pines and crystal-clear streams. Game was plentiful, allowing Ethan to supplement their supplies with fresh meat. They were 2 days from the Montana border when disaster struck. While crossing a swift-running creek, Daisy stumbled on slippery rocks. Tessa was thrown into the rushing water, hitting her head on a boulder as she fell. Ethan reacted instantly, leaping from Thunder's back and plunging into the creek. The current was stronger than it looked, threatening to carry Tessa downstream. He fought his way to her, grabbing her unconscious form and struggling back toward the bank. By the time he pulled her from the water, Tessa's lips had turned blue. For one terrible moment, Ethan feared she wasn't breathing. Then she coughed violently, water streaming from her mouth as she gasped for air. "Easy," he soothed, turning her onto her side. "You're safe now." When her breathing steadied, he examined the gash on her temple. It was bleeding freely, but head wounds always did. More concerning was the dazed look in her eyes. "Ethan," she murmured. "What happened?" Daisy slipped. "You fell and hit your head." He helped her sit up slowly. "How do you feel, Dizzy?" "Cold." She shivered violently, her soaked clothes clinging to her slender frame. Ethan knew he needed to get her warm and dry quickly. He scanned their surroundings, spotting a sheltered area beneath a rocky overhang about 100 yards away. "I'm going to carry you," he warned before lifting her. She nodded weakly, her head lolling against his chest as he bore her to the shelter. Working efficiently, Ethan gathered wood for a fire, thankful that his tinderbox had stayed dry in his saddlebag. Once flames were crackling, he faced a more delicate problem. Tessa's clothes were soaked through, and she continued to shiver despite the growing warmth of the fire. "Tessa," he said gently, "you need to get out of those wet clothes." She looked at him through half-closed eyes. "My spare dress in my pack. I'll get it. But I need to step away while you change. Can you manage alone?" She nodded, though Ethan worried about her unsteadiness. He retrieved her pack from Daisy, who had made her way to shore downstream, then helped Tessa to her feet. "I'll be right over there," he said, pointing to a stand of pines. "Call if you need help." He waited among the trees, listening anxiously for her voice. When she finally called, it was with disturbing weakness. "Ethan, I can't seem to." He hurried back to find her struggling with the buttons of her wet dress, her fingers too numb to work properly. She looked up at him with frustrated tears in her eyes. "I can't feel my fingers." Ethan swallowed hard, knowing what needed to be done but hesitant to overstep. "Let me help," he said finally. "Tell me if you want me to stop." With gentle efficiency, he unbuttoned her dress, keeping his eyes averted as much as possible. He helped her into her dry clothes, then wrapped her in his spare blanket. "Thank you," she whispered, color finally returning to her cheeks as she huddled near the fire. "I'm sorry to be such a burden." "You're not a burden, Tessa." He busied himself preparing a medicinal tea from herbs he carried in his pack. "Here, drink this. It'll help with the pain." The tea helped, but by nightfall, Tessa had developed a fever. The wound on her temple had swollen, an angry red line radiating outward. Ethan cleaned it as best he could, applying a poultice of crushed herbs, but worry gnawed at him. They were days from any settlement, and Tessa's condition was worsening. As she drifted into restless sleep, he kept vigil beside her, bathing her feverish face with cool water from the creek. In her delirium, she called out sometimes for her parents, sometimes in fear of Jackson, and sometimes to Ethan's surprise for him. "Don't leave me," she murmured once, her hand groping blindly until it found his. "Promise you won't leave." "I'm right here," he assured her, gripping her fingers tightly. "I'm not going anywhere." For 3 days, Ethan nursed her, hunting only briefly for food while she slept, never straying far from their camp. He boiled water for poultices, made broth from rabbit meat, and continued to bathe her fevered skin. Each night, he slept beside her, ready to respond to any change in her condition. On the 4th morning, he woke to find her watching him, her eyes clear for the first time since the accident. "How long have I been ill?" she asked, her voice hoarse but steady. Relief washed through him. 3 days. How do you feel?" "Like I've been trampled by a buffalo herd." She touched the wound on her temple gingerly. "But better, I think. The dizziness is gone." Ethan pressed a hand to her forehead. "Fever's broken too. Think you could manage some food?" She nodded, and he busied himself preparing a more substantial meal than the broth she'd been subsisting on. As she ate, He told her about their location and the delay in their journey. "We're still a good 5 days from Bozeman, maybe more if we take it slow. Which we should," he added firmly. "You need to regain your strength." Tessa didn't argue, a testament to how weak she still felt. "Thank you for taking care of me, Ethan. I know it's delayed your plans." He shrugged, uncomfortable with her gratitude. "No place I need to be in any particular hurry." Later that day, as Tessa rested, Ethan checked on the horses. Thunder nickered a greeting, but Daisy seemed off. He examined her legs, finding heat and swelling in her right foreleg. The mare had likely strained it during the creek crossing. This complicated matters. Daisy couldn't carry Tessa until the leg healed, which might take weeks. Thunder could carry double for a while, but not all the way to Bozeman with their supplies. When he explained the situation to Tessa, she took it with characteristic practicality. "Then we'll have to find a settlement where Daisy can rest, and I can perhaps find work until she recovers." Ethan nodded slowly. "There's a trading post about 2 days north of here." "Not much, but they might have work for a teacher. The owner has children, as I recall." "Then that's our plan." The trading post turned out to be more substantial than Ethan remembered. Situated at a crossroads of sorts, Bridger's post served travelers, trappers, and the occasional military patrol. Besides the trading post itself, there was a small livery, a rudimentary saloon, and several cabins scattered among the pines. Samuel Bridger, the proprietor, welcomed them warmly. A burly man with an impressive beard and shrewd eyes, he sized them up quickly. "Teacher, you say?" "My Sarah's been after me to find someone to educate our young uns. Got 4 of my own, plus 5 or 6 others from families hereabouts. Nothing formal, mind you, just basic learning." Tessa's face lit up. "I would be delighted to help, Mr. Bridger. Until our horse recovers and we can continue to Bozeman." "And you, Thornton, what's your trade besides escorting pretty teachers through the wilderness?" Ethan shifted uncomfortably. "Cowhand, mostly, but I can turn my hand to most anything that needs doing." Bridger stroked his beard thoughtfully. "Roof on the storehouse needs mending before winter, and I could use help with the fall hunt. Pays fair, plus room and board." And so they settled into a temporary arrangement at Bridger's post. Tessa took up residence in a small room behind the trading post, while Ethan bunked in the livery. Each morning, children gathered in a cleared space behind Bridger's cabin, where Tessa conducted lessons using books from the Bridger family's modest library and slates borrowed from the trading post's inventory. Ethan found himself lingering at the edges of these lessons when his work allowed, watching as Tessa transformed into a confident, engaging teacher. The children adored her, even the older boys who had initially scoffed at the idea of schooling. For her part, Tessa blossomed in her new role. The color returned to her cheeks, and she moved with renewed energy. She organized the children into reading groups, created mathematical competitions, and even started a small theatrical production of Robin Hood that had the entire settlement buzzing with anticipation. Ethan kept busy with repairs to the trading post's buildings, helped Bridger with hunting expeditions, and tended to both their horses. Daisy's leg was improving, but slowly. The delay that had initially seemed like a setback now felt like an unexpected gift. In the evenings, Ethan and Tessa often walked together along a pine-lined path near the settlement, discussing the day's events. These walks became the highlight of Ethan's days. Without the pressures of the trail, they could simply enjoy each other's company. "Mr. Bridger asked me today if we were planning to stay through winter," Tessa mentioned one evening as golden light filtered through the trees. "He says the pass to Bozeman can be treacherous after the first snows." Ethan nodded. "He's right. If we don't leave by early October, we'd be wiser to wait until spring." And is that what you want to do? Wait until spring? There was something in her tone that made him glance at her sharply. What do you want, Tessa? She stopped walking, facing him with unusual directness. I've been thinking. The children here need a teacher as much as any in Bozeman. Mrs. Bridger says they've never had one before, just occasional lessons from passing missionaries. Are you saying you want to stay? I'm saying I'm considering it. She resumed walking, her skirts brushing the fallen pine needles. What about you? You said you had a job waiting in Bozeman. Ethan hesitated. The fiction he'd created to justify accompanying her had grown complicated. Truth is, I don't have anything specific lined up there. I was just drifting, I suppose. So you could stay too, if you wanted. The possibility hung between them, tantalizing in its simplicity. Bridger's Post was a good place, not too isolated, but far enough from larger settlements to maintain a certain independence. The work was steady, the people decent. I could, Ethan agreed cautiously, if there was a reason to stay. Tessa stopped again, turning to face him. The setting sun caught in her copper hair, creating a halo effect that stole Ethan's breath. Would I be reason enough? She asked softly. The question hit him like a physical blow. Since finding her in the desert, Ethan had fought against his growing feelings for Tessa, telling himself it was merely protectiveness, admiration for her courage. But in this moment, with her looking at him so openly, he couldn't deny the truth any longer. Tessa, a shout from the direction of the trading post interrupted whatever he might have said. They both turned to see young Tommy Bridger running toward them, his face flushed with excitement. Mr. Thornton, Miss Kincaid, Pa says to come quick, riders coming in and one's hurt bad. The moment shattered. Ethan and Tessa hurried back to the settlement. A small group of travelers had arrived, a family heading west to Oregon, their wagon damaged, and the father suffering from a bullet wound received in a skirmish with bandits. The crisis consumed the next several hours. Ethan helped Bridger treat the injured man, while Tessa organized care for the family's exhausted children. By the time things settled, the conversation in the pine forest seemed like a distant dream, yet something had changed between them. In the days that followed, Ethan found Tessa watching him with thoughtful eyes when she thought he wasn't looking. For his part, he found excuses to be near her classroom, to walk with her in the evenings, to sit beside her at meals in the Bridger household. September gave way to October. The first frost silvered the ground one morning, a harbinger of the winter to come. Daisy was sound again, but neither Ethan nor Tessa mentioned resuming their journey to Bozeman. Instead, Ethan began working on a small cabin at the edge of the settlement, ostensibly as additional housing for travelers, but everyone, including Tessa, seemed to understand it was something more. One crisp afternoon, as Ethan was shingling the roof, Tessa appeared with a basket containing bread, cheese, and a jug of cider. Mrs. Bridger thought you might be hungry, she called up to him. Though I suspect she's just trying to give me an excuse to see you. Ethan climbed down, wiping his hands on his trousers before accepting the basket. And do you need an excuse? Tessa's smile was warm. I'm beginning to think I don't. Not anymore. They shared the simple meal sitting on newly cut logs beside the cabin. The air was sharp with the scent of pine and wood smoke, the sky an impossible blue overhead. It's coming along well, Tessa remarked, nodding toward the cabin. When will it be finished? Before the first snow, God willing. Another week, maybe two. Ethan hesitated, then plunged ahead. Tessa, there's something I need to say. About that conversation we were having before the riders came in. Her cheeks flushed, but she met his gaze steadily. Yes, you asked if you'd be reason enough for me to stay. He set aside his cup of cider, turning to face her fully. The truth is, you're reason enough for me to do just about anything. I've never felt this way about anyone before." Tessa's eyes widened. "Ethan, let me finish, please. I know we haven't known each other long, and I'm not a man of means. I can't offer you the kind of life you might have had back east, but I can promise to work hard to be faithful to build something good here." He gestured toward the cabin. "With you, if you'll have me." For a heart-stopping moment, Tessa was silent. Then, to Ethan's amazement, she laughed a joyous sound that echoed among the trees. "Oh, Ethan Thornton, for a man who tracks so well, you can be remarkably blind." She moved closer, her eyes shining. "I've been half in love with you since you found me in that desert, and wholly in love with you since you nursed me through that fever." Joy surged through Ethan, but uncertainty held him back. "What about Bozeman? Your plans?" "Plans change," she said simply. "Sometimes for the better. I came west seeking purpose and independence. I've found both here, along with something I wasn't looking for." She reached for his hand. "Something wonderful." Ethan entwined his fingers with hers, marveling at how perfectly they fit together. "I love you, Tessa Kincaid. I think I have since I first saw your tracks in the desert sand. And I love you, Ethan Thornton, my rescuer, my friend, my future." Their first kiss was tender, a promise exchanged beneath the October sky. When they finally drew apart, Ethan gestured toward the cabin. "It's meant for us, if you'll say yes." Tessa's smile was radiant. "Yes, to everything." They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony conducted by a circuit-riding preacher who happened through Bridger's post. The entire settlement turned out for the celebration, with Mrs. Bridger providing a feast and Samuel Bridger himself giving the bride away. The cabin was finished just in time, with the community contributing furnishings: a table from the Bridgers, chairs from the blacksmith, a quilt from the trapper's wife. It was small but solid, with 2 rooms and a stone fireplace that Ethan had built with particular care. On their wedding night, as snow began to fall outside their new home, Ethan and Tessa stood by the fireplace, the dancing flames illuminating their faces. "Happy?" Ethan asked, drawing her close. "More than I ever thought possible." She touched his face wonderingly. "When Jackson abandoned me in that desert, I thought my life was over. I never imagined it was just beginning. I thank God every day that I found your tracks," Ethan said huskily, "that I followed them to you." "To us," Tessa corrected, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. "To our destiny." As winter settled over Bridger's post, Ethan and Tessa established their new life together. She continued teaching the settlement's children, while he worked with Bridger and began developing his own business as a guide and tracker for travelers and hunters. Their love deepened with each passing day, strengthened by the challenges they faced together: the harsh winter, occasional tensions with native tribes in the region, the isolated nature of frontier life. Where once they had been 2 solitary souls, they were now a partnership, each complementing the other's strengths. By spring, they had become integral members of the small community. When Bridger announced plans to expand the trading post, it was Ethan who designed the addition and supervised its construction. When several families from the east arrived, looking to settle nearby, it was Tessa who helped them adjust to frontier life, expanding her school to accommodate the new children. On a warm June evening, almost a year after Ethan had found Tessa in the New Mexico desert, they sat on the porch of their cabin, watching fireflies rise from the meadow beyond. "I have news," Tessa said, a secretive smile playing at her lips. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "What kind of news?" "The kind that means we'll need to add another room to the cabin by winter." She guided his hand to her still flat abdomen. "We're going to have a baby, Ethan." Joy, pure and overwhelming, flooded through him. "A baby, you're sure?" Mrs. Bridger confirmed it today. "She says February, most likely." Ethan gathered her into his arms, laughing through sudden tears. "A baby," he repeated wonderingly. "Our baby." As they sat together in the gathering dusk, planning their expanding future, Ethan reflected on the strange twists of fate that had brought them together. A woman abandoned in the desert. A cowboy following tracks in the sand. Two lives intersecting against impossible odds. "What are you thinking about?" Tessa asked, nestled against his chest. "About tracks," he said, kissing the top of her head, "and how the ones that seem most desperate can sometimes lead to the greatest joy." 5 years later, Bridger's Post had grown into a proper settlement, now called Thornton's Crossing after its most prominent citizens. The trading post had expanded into a general store, a school building had been erected adjacent to the church, and a dozen new families had put down roots in the fertile valley. Ethan and Tessa's cabin had grown too, now a comfortable 4-room house with a thriving garden and a small stable. Their family had expanded as well. 4-year-old William, named for Ethan's father, had his mother's copper hair and his father's quiet determination. 2-year-old Eleanor had Ethan's dark curls and Tessa's bright blue eyes, along with a spirit of adventure that kept her parents constantly alert. On the anniversary of the day Ethan had found Tessa in the desert, they always took a private walk together, renewing their commitment to each other and reflecting on the journey that had brought them together. "You ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't found my tracks that day?" Tessa asked during one such walk as they watched their children playing in a meadow bright with wildflowers. Ethan shook his head. "No, some things are meant to be, Tessa. I believe that now. I was meant to find you. We were meant to find each other." She slipped her hand into his, a gesture as familiar and essential as breathing. "From desperation to destiny. And the greatest blessing of my life," Ethan added, drawing her close for a kiss that, even after 5 years, still held all the wonder of their first. In the distance, William called for them, proudly holding up a bouquet of wildflowers he'd gathered for his mother. Eleanor toddled after him, her chubby hands clutching a single daisy. Laughing, Ethan and Tessa moved to join their children, walking hand in hand into the future. They'd built together a future that had begun with desperate tracks in the desert sand, and led to a love as vast and enduring as the western sky above them.